On a pale afternoon weighted with perfume and polite indifference, she sat alone at the long mahogany table, her teacup cooling untouched while conversation eddied around her like water refusing a stone. Chandeliers glimmered above, their light catching on pearls and polished smiles, yet none inclined toward her. She was of good blood, that much was known, though good blood without money was a story London had learned to stop listening to. Each rustle of silk passing her chair carried a verdict already rendered, and she bore it with a stillness learned through years of quiet endurance. Her name, Miss Eleanor Harcourt, belonged to a lineage older than many present, though her circumstances had dwindled since her father's death left more honor than income. Her mother, frail and anxious, lingered at the edge of assemblies, hoping proximity might yet conjure mercy. Eleanor herself had mastered the art of composure, the careful lowering of eyes, the measured breath that betrayed nothing. Still, humiliation has a sound, and she heard it in the pauses where invitation should have been, in the laughter that curved deliberately away. Across the room, alliances formed and dissolved with practiced ease. Mothers appraised prospects like ledgers, daughters tilted their heads just so, and gentlemen calculated advantage behind courteous bows. Eleanor watched it all with the detached clarity of one long resigned, though resignation did not dull longing. She had not expected romance. She had hoped merely for relevance. Instead, she occupied the most punishing position society could offer a woman of her station. Neither pitted nor pursued, merely overlooked. It was then she felt the attention, a pressure rather than a glance, and looked up to meet the regard of the Duchess of Ashcombe. The Duchess stood apart from the general bustle, a figure of formidable elegance, her silver hair arranged with uncompromising precision. Years of command had refined her gaze into an instrument, capable of measuring worth in seconds. Eleanor lowered her eyes instinctively, uncertain which flaw had drawn notice. The Duchess approached without haste, the room subtly adjusting around her progress. Chairs shifted, conversation softened, paths cleared. When she reached Eleanor's place, she did not immediately speak. She took the vacant chair beside her instead, accepted a fresh cup of tea, and only then inclined her head, as though they were equals meeting by appointment rather than strangers divided by power. "You are Miss Harcourt," the Duchess said, her voice calm, neither kind nor cruel. "I am, Your Grace," Eleanor replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own tone. For a moment, the Duchess observed the room, her expression unreadable. Then she leaned closer, the lace at her sleeve brushing Eleanor's glove, and spoke again, this time so softly that the words belonged only to them. "You find yourself unoccupied today," she murmured. "An inconvenience I believe we may resolve, if you possess discretion." Eleanor's pulse quickened, though she gave no outward sign. Discretion was a currency she had learned to hoard. "I should be honored to serve if I am able," she answered carefully. The Duchess's lips curved, not in warmth, but in satisfaction. "Excellent. For the remainder of this season, it would be most useful for society to suppose that you are affianced to my son." The words settled between them, astonishing in their simplicity and their danger. Eleanor's thoughts scattered, then reassembled with painful clarity. The Duke's heir was a man she knew only by reputation, reserved, dutiful, and central to ambitions whispered in political corridors. To be named beside him, even falsely, was to invite scrutiny she had spent years avoiding. "I do not understand," Eleanor said, though she did. "Understanding is not required," the Duchess replied. "Only agreement." She explained nothing further, yet Eleanor grasped enough. Rumor had begun to circle the Ashcombe family, threatening the heir's standing, perhaps his inheritance. Appearances, as ever, must be fortified, and Eleanor, obscure enough to be shaped and respectable enough to be believed, had been selected as remedy. Eleanor hesitated, the weight of consequence pressing upon her chest. Acceptance might elevate her beyond recall or destroy what little she retained. Refusal would return her to invisibility, safer yet suffocating. She thought of her mother's anxious eyes, of cold evenings spent accounting for dwindling resources, of a future narrowing to polite obscurity. "I would never wish to cause offense," she said finally, choosing her words as one chooses steps across thin ice. "Offense will be unavoidable," the Duchess replied, standing. "But survival often is." She paused, allowing a beat for the room to observe their proximity. "Consider carefully," Miss Harcourt. Society has already decided what you are worth. I offer you the chance to interrupt that judgment." With that, she departed, leaving Eleanor surrounded by murmurs newly sharpened with interest. A few glances returned, curious now, speculative. Eleanor sat very still, her untouched tea trembling faintly as though stirred by an unseen hand. She understood, with a clarity that frightened her, that she had been offered not protection but transformation, and that the choice before her would alter the shape of her life. As the gathering resumed its rhythm, Eleanor felt the old humiliation give way to something more perilous: hope. It flickered, unwelcome yet undeniable, and as she lifted her cup at last, she knew that nothing in that room would ever look at her the same way again. By the following morning, Eleanor Harcourt awoke with the peculiar sensation that the world had shifted while she slept, like furniture rearranged in the dark. The modest bedchamber she shared with her mother remained unchanged, yet her thoughts were crowded with the Duchess's whisper, each syllable returning with renewed force. When she rose and dressed, she did so with a care that bordered on reverence, as though her very movements might now be observed by an invisible audience. The lie had not yet been spoken aloud, yet already it pressed upon her shoulders with the weight of expectation. The first token of transformation arrived before noon, conveyed not by proclamation but by implication. A carriage bearing the Ashcombe crest halted before their door, its presence drawing curious glances from neighbors accustomed to quieter associations. Eleanor's mother, pale with alarm and wonder, could scarcely speak as Eleanor was handed a note requesting her attendance that afternoon. The words were brief, formal, and unmistakably commanding. Eleanor folded the paper with steady fingers, aware that refusal was no longer a simple matter of pride. At Ashcombe House, she was received with efficiency rather than ceremony, ushered through corridors heavy with portraiture into a sitting-room where the Duchess awaited her. Without preamble, arrangements were outlined, visits to be paid, events to be attended, assumptions to be neither corrected nor elaborated upon. Eleanor listened, absorbing each instruction like a rule of survival. When the Duchess finished, she rang for tea, then regarded Eleanor with a scrutiny less severe than before. "You will meet my son this evening," she said. "He understands necessity." The meeting took place not in a grand hall, but in a quiet withdrawing room lit by the low glow of lamps. He entered without flourish, tall and composed, his expression reserved to the point of severity. Eleanor recognized him instantly, though she had never stood so close to him before. This was Julian Ashcombe, heir to the dukedom, a man shaped by obligation and watched by the nation's most discerning eyes. "Miss Harcourt," he said, bowing with precise courtesy, "I thank you for agreeing to assist my family." "I have agreed to nothing yet," Eleanor replied, surprising herself with her honesty. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. "Then allow me to persuade you," he said quietly. "Not with sentiment, but with truth." They spoke at length, though their words remained measured. He explained the rumors, the political entanglements, the necessity of appearing anchored to respectability beyond question. He did not plead, nor did he threaten. Instead, he acknowledged the danger to her position with an integrity that unsettled her more than charm might have done. "I will not pretend this arrangement is without risk," he said. "Nor will I insult you by suggesting gratitude should compensate for it." Eleanor studied him, noting the absence of arrogance, the restraint with which he held himself. In him she saw a mirror of her own discipline, though his had been forged by privilege rather than loss. "If I consent," she asked, "what becomes of me when the pretense ends?" He met her gaze directly. "I cannot promise safety," he said. "Only that I will not abandon you to consequences I create." The honesty of the answer sealed her decision. She inclined her head. "Then we proceed," she said. By the next day, society had adjusted its narrative. Eleanor's name appeared beside his in conversations once closed to her, her presence now anticipated rather than endured. Invitations arrived, phrased with a sudden warmth that bordered on excess. At Hyde Park, she walked on his arm beneath the open sky, aware of eyes tracing every step. Julian spoke little, yet his attentiveness never faltered, guiding her through the spectacle with quiet authority. The Duchess ensured that tangible signs accompanied the illusion. A slim volume of poetry appeared at Eleanor's door, its selection thoughtful rather than extravagant. Later, a bouquet arrived, restrained in color, impeccable in taste. Each offering was discussed, dissected, and interpreted by others, though Eleanor understood their true purpose lay not in romance but reassurance. Still, moments intruded that unsettled her resolve. Julian's voice, lowered to spare her from speculation, carried a warmth she had not expected. Once, during a pause in conversation, he said softly, "You bear this with remarkable courage." The words lingered long after he turned away. Not all responses were kind. At a musicale, a woman of unimpeachable fortune examined Eleanor with thinly veiled skepticism, remarking upon her sudden elevation. Eleanor replied with courtesy untainted by apology, though the exchange left her hands trembling beneath her gloves. Julian observed from a distance, his gaze sharpening, and later placed himself unmistakably at her side. That evening, as they departed beneath a canopy of stars, Eleanor realized that the lie had begun to change its shape. It no longer belonged solely to strategy or survival. It had become something watched, tested, and dangerously alive. As their carriage rolled away from the lights, she wondered not whether society believed them, but whether she herself soon might. Rain pressed against the carriage windows as though London itself wished to overhear their silence, each droplet a measured knock upon the fragile boundary between pretense and truth. Eleanor sat opposite Julian, her hands folded, her posture impeccable, yet her composure strained by the intimacy of enclosure. Publicly they had learned to perform with ease, but privacy revealed the cost of vigilance. The carriage rocked gently, and with each turn of the wheels she felt the lie shift closer to her heart. It was Julian who spoke first, his voice low, shaped by caution. "You need not accompany me to Ashcombe House tonight," he said. "My mother would understand." "I would prefer to come," Eleanor replied, though the words surprised her. She had begun to measure preference too carefully, aware how dangerous it might become. Absence invites interpretation. He inclined his head in acknowledgment. "You have learned quickly," he said, not unkindly. They arrived in near silence, the house receiving them with its usual gravity. Within, a fire burned steadily in the library, casting amber light across shelves heavy with history. The Duchess had withdrawn for the evening, leaving the space conspicuously theirs. Eleanor felt the weight of that allowance, the deliberate privacy granted like a test. Julian gestured for her to sit, then remained standing himself, his back to the fire. The flames etched sharp lines along his profile, lending his restraint a severity that unsettled her. "There are matters we must address," he said. "Matters that grow more pressing with every appearance we make." Eleanor met his gaze, steady though her pulse quickened. "I have sensed as much. The rumors have not ceased," he continued. "They have merely changed their nature. Where there was doubt, there is now scrutiny." He paused, choosing precision over comfort. "If this continues, expectation will demand permanence." The word lingered, heavy and irrevocable. Eleanor's breath caught, though she refused to let it show. "And if permanence is demanded," she asked, "what then?" Julian crossed the room and sat opposite her at last, close enough that she could discern the faint weariness in his eyes. "Then I must decide whether to uphold a fiction indefinitely, or to confess it and accept the consequences." "And I?" Eleanor asked softly. His gaze did not waver. "You would suffer more than I," he said. "That knowledge weighs upon me." The admission cracked something open between them. Eleanor rose before she could reconsider, moving toward the window as though distance might lend her clarity. Beyond the glass, rain blurred the city into abstraction. "I agreed because I believed invisibility the greater danger," she said. "I did not foresee how visible one becomes once chosen." Julian stood as well, though he did not approach. "Nor did I foresee how choice might become attachment," he said quietly. The honesty of the word left them both still. Eleanor turned, her expression composed but her eyes bright with unguarded feeling. "Attachment," she repeated. "Is that what troubles you?" "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "Because it complicates duty." She studied him then, truly, seeing beyond the heir and the obligation to the man shaped by both. "Duty has governed your life," she said. Does it permit no deviation? It permits sacrifice, he replied. Usually of oneself, occasionally of others. The acknowledgment stung, though she recognized its truth. I have lived by sacrifice as well, she said. Yet no one has ever named it so plainly. Silence returned, dense but altered. Julian moved at last, stopping a careful distance from her. If you wish to withdraw, he said, I will arrange it. Quietly, if possible. Eleanor considered the offer, its mercy and its implication. To withdraw now would be to relinquish not only safety, but the fragile sense of being seen. And if I do not? She asked. His voice softened. Then we must speak honestly, even when society demands performance. She searched his face for presumption and found none. Instead there was restraint held taut by regard. Honesty, she said, is a dangerous indulgence. Only when delayed, he replied. A moment stretched between them, intimate yet unresolved. Eleanor felt the impulse to reach for him, to bridge the space with a gesture that would render words unnecessary. She did not. Instead, she said, I am afraid. Julian nodded once. So am I. The confession bound them more tightly than any vow. The fire crackled, punctuating their shared stillness. At last, Julian stepped back, restoring distance with visible effort. For now, he said, we proceed as before. Appearances maintained, boundaries observed. For now, Eleanor agreed. As she left the library later that evening, she carried with her not relief, but resolve sharpened by truth. The lie remained, yet beneath it something real had taken root, fragile and forbidden. She understood now that the danger lay not in exposure alone, but in the possibility that when the moment came to choose, neither of them would be willing to let go. The decisive evening arrived clothed in ceremony, its significance announced not by fanfare but by the gravity with which servants moved through Ashcombe House. Eleanor stood before the looking-glass, her reflection composed yet altered, as though the weeks of pretense had quietly redrawn her features. The gown prepared for her was elegant without extravagance, chosen to suggest continuity rather than conquest. She recognized the intention at once. Tonight was meant to confirm what society already believed, to transform assumption into certainty. When Julian entered to escort her, he paused, his expression betraying a fleeting disarray swiftly mastered. You look, he began, then stopped, choosing restraint over eloquence. You are perfectly suited to the evening. Eleanor inclined her head. As are you, she replied, though what she meant went beyond appearance. He seemed steadier now, resolved in a way that both reassured and unsettled her. Whatever choice awaited them would not be avoided. The gathering assembled with deliberate grandeur, a convergence of influence and expectation. Members of Parliament, titled relations, and watchful acquaintances filled the rooms, their conversations braided with speculation. Eleanor felt the scrutiny keenly, yet she no longer shrank beneath it. Julian's presence beside her was constant, not possessive but unequivocal, and she sensed the shift it produced in others. The lie had acquired weight through repetition, and now it demanded conclusion. At the appointed moment, the Duchess called for attention. She stood before the assembly, her composure flawless, her authority unquestioned. Eleanor felt Julian's hand steady at her elbow, a silent assurance that steadied her own breath. The Duchess spoke of continuity, of alliances strengthened, of confidence restored. Then she turned, her gaze fixing upon Eleanor with an intensity that held neither threat nor warmth, only expectation. My son, she said, wishes to address you. Julian stepped forward, the room falling into attentive silence. Eleanor watched him, noting the subtle tension in his shoulders, the resolve in his stance. I am grateful for your presence, he began. Many of you have extended congratulations in recent weeks. It is time I clarify the nature of that felicitation. A murmur stirred, restrained yet alert. Eleanor felt the instant before decision, the fragile balance upon which everything rested. Julian continued, his voice calm. What began as convenience has become conviction. I stand before you not to perpetuate assumption, but to claim intention. He turned then, facing Eleanor fully. In that moment, The assembly dissolved from her awareness, leaving only the man whose gaze held both apology and promise. "Miss Harcourt," he said, his voice softening though it carried across the room, "I ask you now, without pretense, whether you will consent to become my wife." The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor felt it like a held breath, waiting to be released. Her thoughts moved swiftly yet clearly, tracing the path that had led her here. She thought of obscurity endured, of dignity preserved against indifference, of fear met with courage not of her own making alone. She understood that acceptance would bind her to a life of scrutiny and responsibility, yet refusal would sever something irretrievably precious. "I will," she said, her voice steady, resonant with choice. The room exhaled, sound returning in a wave of astonishment and approval. Julian's expression altered then, relief and something fiercer breaking through restraint. He took her hand, not as symbol but as pledge, and for the first time allowed the gesture to linger. The Duchess observed them, her satisfaction measured but unmistakable. Later, in the quiet that followed dispersal, she approached Eleanor alone. "You have exceeded expectation," she said. "That is no small accomplishment." "I did only what was asked," Eleanor replied. The Duchess regarded her thoughtfully. "No," she said. "You did more. Remember that." As the house settled into calm, Eleanor and Julian stood together near the windows, the city lights flickering beyond. "I would have understood if you had refused," he said quietly. "I know," Eleanor answered. "That is why I did not." They shared a smile, restrained yet genuine, and in it Eleanor felt the certainty that what lay ahead, though demanding, would be faced in partnership rather than performance. The lie that had drawn them together had yielded to truth, not by exposure but by choice, and as they turned from the window, Eleanor knew that whatever society required of them next, she would meet it no longer alone.